The sound of the last water droplet echoing through my kitchen sink still haunts me. It was early July, and the Arizona sun had already scorched the earth. By 9 a.m., my faucets had run dry. The garden hoses were limp, useless snakes in the dirt. My well-irrigated, self-sustaining homestead, once the pride of Whispering Pines Estates, was silent, brittle, dying by the second. I remember standing barefoot on my back porch, sweat pooling at the base of my neck, staring in disbelief at the brown patches spreading across my rose beds. The irrigation pumps were dead. The entire water system had stopped. No notice. No warning. No explanation. Just silence. Then came the letter, taped crudely to my mailbox, crumpled and smeared with dust. It bore the unmistakable stamp of the HOA board. In bold red letters, water access to your property has been suspended for non-compliance with HOA landscaping regulations. Service will not resume until all conditions are met and all fines paid in full. Fines? Non-compliance? I had lived here 15 years, paid every fee, filed every permit, followed every absurd rule until last month, when I refused to tear down the rainwater barrels my late wife and I built together, barrels that kept this place alive during droughts, that nourished every tree she planted by hand. This wasn't about rules. This was about revenge. HOA president Carol Whitmore had taken a personal dislike to me the day I spoke against her luxury clubhouse expansion at the community meeting. I called out the missing financial disclosures. I asked the wrong questions. Now she was hitting where it hurt. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 15 years ago, I made a deal with the original land developer. A quiet, dusty handshake that gave me full legal ownership of the reservoir that Whispering Pines depended on. Yes, that reservoir. The one supplying water to every home in this HOA, including hers. And when I saw my hydrangeas wilt, I didn't just get mad. I got ready. I pulled out the deed. I opened the dusty storage chest with my late wife's documents and permits. I made some calls to my lawyer. And I waited. Because cutting off my water wasn't just a mistake. It was the beginning of their end. They wanted war over water. They had no idea who they were messing with. So before I take you into the trenches of petty tyranny, sabotage, and the unraveling of a corrupt HOA empire, comment below where you're watching from, because though horror stories like this happen everywhere, what happened next will absolutely blow your mind and prove that justice can prevail even against the most powerful bullies. Stay with me. This is the story of how they turned off my tap and I drained their entire kingdom. My name is Daniel Holt. I'm 63 years old. Retired Army Corps of Engineers with 22 years of active service and another decade consulting for municipal infrastructure across the Southwest. I've built dams, designed storm drains, restored floodplains. I know land, I know water. And more than anything else, I know how power flows, even when it's buried underground in pipes and red tape. After my wife, June, passed away from pancreatic cancer in 2017, I walked away from every contract, every blueprint, and every boardroom. All I wanted was peace. She and I had bought this parcel of land on the far eastern ridge of Whispering Pines back in 2008, before most of the development had even broken ground. It was wild, rocky, dry, but she saw promise. We designed everything together. The house, the greenhouse, the gray water system, and yes, the rain barrels. We even hiked the property line with a compass and survey gear, marking every corner with copper stakes. It was her dream to create a place that could survive off the grid if it had to self-sustaining. Practical and beautiful, she called it. Our sanctuary. And that's exactly what it was. Our back porch faced a stretch of cottonwood trees that lined the trickling seasonal stream, a stream that fed directly into the reservoir nestled behind the southern hill, about half a mile from our lot line. She used to sit in her rocking chair with a mug of chamomile, listening to the wind slip through those leaves and say, "We did this right, Danny. This place will outlive us both." After she died, I kept everything the way she left it. The rose garden, the owl house we mounted on the barn roof, even her hand-carved bird bath, now chipped at the edge. Every inch of this land has her fingerprint in it. And when the HOA started demanding I remove the barrels, claiming they were a structural hazard and visible from the street, I knew they weren't just challenging a piece of equipment. They were desecrating her memory. The rainwater system she designed wasn't just a sentimental relic. It worked. It collected runoff from the entire roof and stored it in sealed barrels, filtered through gravel and charcoal, and gravity fed into a drip system that watered our entire garden. It was brilliant, efficient, legal, and it was ours. When I pushed back sending in documentation, engineering reports, the county permit HOA president Carol Whitmore didn't even respond directly. Instead, I got 3 citations in 1 week. Unapproved structural addition, unauthorized landscaping alteration, violation of aesthetic compliance. It wasn't about code. It was control. But that was just the start. Sea whispering. Pines didn't used to be this way. When June and I bought in, it was still loose-knit. No dues, no meetings, just a handful of retirees and ranch families looking for open sky. But 5 years ago, after a private equity firm scooped up the last of the undeveloped lots, the new HOA formed with Carol at the helm. She came in like she owned the place. Former real estate agent from Scottsdale. Always wore coral blazers and pearls, even in the middle of a dust storm. Claimed she wanted to revitalize the community's image. What she really wanted was uniformity. She hated my place. Said it was visually inconsistent. Said it depressed neighboring property values. Said it was better suited to an off-grid survivalist show than a family neighborhood. But I didn't care about her opinion. I cared about my sanctuary. The turning point came the day I went to turn on the spigot for the back garden and nothing came out. I checked the valves, walked the lines. Everything was working. The problem wasn't on my land. The HOA had shut off my municipal connection, just like that. No hearing, no vote, just silence. That was when I went down into the cellar and unlocked the old wooden trunk. Inside were deeds, maps, agreements. Back in 2008, before any of this land was subdivided, the original developer had offered me something in exchange for helping him design the stormwater drainage grid. First rights to a parcel containing the retention basin. It wasn't much at the time. A dry depression meant to hold overflow during monsoon season. But I had the foresight to ask for ownership, not just access. Over time, that basin became the reservoir. The HOA invested in piping, a pump station, and filtration upgrades, all feeding from that single body of water. No one ever checked who owned the land beneath it, except me. That title was in June's name, transferred to mine after she passed. That reservoir wasn't community property. It wasn't managed by the county. It wasn't under HOA control. It was mine. And the moment they turned off my water, I knew it was time to remind them. But I didn't react right away. No, I documented everything. Took photos of the dried pipes. Kept copies of every fine, every letter. Filmed the dead flowers, the wilted vegetables, the dust blowing across our once lush garden. I began recording phone calls. I asked every question in writing, because this wasn't going to be a petty feud. This was going to be a reckoning. And June? She would have wanted it that way. Carol Whitmore was the kind of woman who could weaponize a smile. 61 years old, 5'6" in heels, she always wore usually white wedges with tacky gold buckles. She had frosted blonde hair that sat like lacquered cotton candy, and skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, perpetually dusted in bronzer. Her perfume, some overpowering citrus and rose blend, always announced her arrival before you saw her, and when she walked into a room, she acted like she owned it. Because, in her mind, she did. She had taken over as HOA president 3 years ago in what she proudly called a full board reform. In truth, it was a silent coup. The old board, made up of a few aging neighbors who met once a month over iced tea, had been pressured out by a flurry of technical bylaw challenges and procedural audits, all spearheaded by Carol. She recruited her inner circle from a specific pool, recently relocated ex-urbanites with too much time and too many opinions. Each one owed their position to Carol, and each one was just as eager to police mulch colors and birdhouse sizes. They started small mailbox height ordinances, decorative flag bans, and a crackdown on unsightly storage containers. But when no one pushed back, they grew bolder. By the time they got to me, they thought they were untouchable. I still remember the first notice of violation I received in person. Carol arrived at my door dressed like she was heading to a country club, mixer white linen pants, a seafoam blouse, and a sun visor that probably cost more than my water pump. She didn't knock. She rang the bell 3 times and then stepped back with her clipboard in hand and a pastel pink folder tucked under her arm. "Mr. Holt," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "we've received several concerns from your neighbors about unauthorized structures and water collection equipment visible from the easement." I glanced behind her. No one was on the street. No movement. No concerned neighbors. Just Carol and her clipboard, alone like a hunter marking her prey. "They're legal," I replied calmly. "County approved, permitted. Been here for over 10 years. "Well," she said, tapping her pen on the folder, "the HOA covenants have been updated. And as of this month, rainwater collection devices must not be visible from any public-facing direction. It's about curb appeal and harmony." "Carol," I said slowly, "my rain barrels are behind a 7-foot privacy fence." Her smile widened. "Which brings us to violation 2. Your fence exceeds the 6-foot height regulation. And the color hasn't been approved." That was the beginning. Within a week, I received 3 more notices. Incompatible exterior paint color, for the barn June painted herself a dusty blue. Excessive natural landscaping, because I used native desert plants that, in Carol's words, look like weeds. Non-compliant garden structures, referring to a wooden trellis where June once grew snap peas. I responded to each notice in writing, attached every relevant permit, every piece of documentation. I tried to be civil, respectful, professional. The reply? More notices. Heavier fines. When I attempted to speak at the next HOA board meeting, I was silenced. Carol called me disruptive and had security, yes, security, escort me out before I finished my sentence. Later that night, I caught a glimpse of movement near my property line. A car parked just outside the camera range. Someone stepping out, walking along the fence line, phone in hand, filming, documenting. I installed more cameras. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw her 2 more times, always from a distance, always at dusk. Filed complaints. The HOA ignored them. That was when I started hearing whispers. Neighbors stopped waving. Conversations ended when I walked by. One woman, Angela, who used to trade tomatoes with me, wouldn't even meet my eyes. I overheard Carol at a neighborhood potluck tell people I was dangerous, a prepper, and probably hoarding weapons. She was isolating me, turning the community against me. I received a letter from the zoning office a few days later, and anonymous tip had accused me of illegal graywater dumping. I had to submit to a surprise inspection. The county agent was embarrassed. Everything passed, of course. But the message was clear. They weren't going to stop. Carol's campaign wasn't about aesthetics. It wasn't about water barrels or trellises or fence heights. It was about control. And I had questioned hers. At this point, the fines had stacked into the thousands. She claimed my property was non-compliant on 12 different counts. threatened to place a lien if I didn't pay, and then without a single word of warning cut off my water. But Carol made one fatal assumption. She thought I was just another cranky old man clinging to the past. She didn't know who I was, what I'd built, what I still had buried in files and deeds and maps from a decade ago. And worst of all, she didn't know who the reservoir belonged to. I didn't rage. I didn't retaliate. I documented every notice, every phone call, every photo of her trespassing. I timestamped footage. I compiled permits. I began pulling historical plat maps and zoning amendments. Because Carol didn't just cross a line. She detonated a minefield, and she had no idea what was about to blow up in her face. After Carol cut off my water, she expected me to fold. She assumed I'd sell, leave, or at the very least, comply and apologize. But I didn't budge. That infuriated her, and what followed was not just pettiness. It was full-blown war. Harassment escalated in ways that felt coordinated, targeted, and cruel. First came the vandalism. One morning, I stepped outside and saw my greenhouse panels shattered. The polycarbonate roof looked like it had been smashed in with a crowbar. Dirt had been kicked over my seedlings, irrigation lines yanked up like someone had gone trenching for sport. My tomatoes, which I'd nursed for months from heirloom seed, were uprooted, the roots still damp, tossed in a pile like garbage. The sheriff's deputy who came out shook his head. "No signs of forced entry," he said. "Could be teenagers." Teenagers. Don't disable a water timer, rip out copper wiring, or spray herbicide in flower beds. I knew who did it. And when I checked my camera footage, I found the angle covering the greenhouse had been tampered with, turned away. The others caught nothing. That week, I received another violation for debris and visual disorder. They fined me for the destruction they caused. Then came the fraudulent legal claims. A formal letter arrived from the HOA's legal counsel, a smug, faux authoritative firm Carol had retained. They accused me of violating local water codes by operating unauthorized rainwater and graywater reclamation systems. The letter was laced with threats, fines up to $10,000, civil injunctions, the possibility of county involvement. I knew the law. Arizona allows rainwater collection. So I called the county water department directly, got it in writing, and filed a counterclaim. The next week, I was reported anonymously to the health department. The claim? That I was breeding mosquitoes through unsealed stagnant water containers. I was forced to host a surprise inspection. Nothing found. And then I received notice that a lien had been placed on my property. Carol's board had voted, without me present, to enforce back fines totaling over $17,000. That lien nearly killed my small veterans pension refinance. The paperwork was flagged. My interest rate tripled. Still, I stood my ground. Until one afternoon, when I saw a white sedan idling across from my property. Again, I stepped out and walked toward it. The car peeled off. But the next day, I found footprints around my propane tank. Someone had tried to open the valve. This wasn't pettiness anymore. This was dangerous. But what broke me most wasn't the property damage or legal tactics. It was the isolation. Carol used the community newsletter to smear me. In the president's note, she referred to problematic residents undermining unity, and without naming names, she described someone hoarding water, deliberately misusing shared resources, and engaging in hostile behavior. I became the HOA's scapegoat. People I'd helped build fence lines with wouldn't look at me. Kids who used to visit the garden crossed the street to avoid my driveway. A friend I'd served with who lived 3 houses down stopped answering my calls. The lies spread like wildfire. Someone edited my face into a mugshot and circulated it on the community message board. The photo was fake but effective. I was being erased. One day I stood by the birdbath June had carved, watching 2 hummingbirds dart around the dead roses. My throat tightened. My hands trembled. I don't know how much more of this I can take, I said aloud to no one. That night, I almost packed a bag. Almost walked away, but I didn't, because I remembered June's voice, soft and clear. This land is ours. You don't walk away from your home. So I sat at the dining table and spread everything out. Letters, permits, notices, maps, legal filings. Then I pulled up the reservoir deed. They thought they had broken me. But they had forgotten one thing. I didn't just live here. I built this place. Every pipe, every drain, every corner of the system, and their entire water infrastructure ran through my land. The HOA had spent thousands upgrading the reservoir over the years without ever checking the title. They assumed it was common property because it always had been. But the original deal with the land developer gave ownership to me. The title had my wife's name. Now it had mine. I realized something critical. Carol's campaign wasn't just about compliance. It was about eliminating resistance to a larger plan. I started digging literally and figuratively, using archived County Planning Commission records and plat maps. I discovered a new proposal had been submitted 6 months earlier. Whispering Pines Phase 2, a massive expansion of high-density housing, 1,200 units planned adjacent to the existing community. Guess who filed the application? A shell corporation called Mesa Horizon Developments, LLC. Guess who was listed as a senior consultant? Carol Whitmore. That's why she wanted me gone. My property, my infrastructure, and especially my reservoir sat right where the planned expansion would connect. If I sold, she'd get the final puzzle piece. If I stayed, the whole project stalled. This wasn't a personal vendetta. It was a land grab. She was manipulating HOA power to clear the path for a lucrative development deal and using community governance as a weapon. And now, I knew. That night I opened a fresh notebook and labeled the first page, Evidence Log. I began recording everything line by line, date by date. I backed up all my footage, scanned every letter, labeled every violation notice, but I needed help. I couldn't take her down alone. So I reached out, carefully. First, to Lenny, an old friend and retired detective who now lived 2 counties over. He agreed to help me organize the legal case, said he'd look into Mesa Horizon's corporate filings. Then to Marisol, a former forensic accountant who had helped fix her irrigation system 2 years earlier. She was cautious, afraid. But when I told her Carol might be funneling HOA funds through shell companies, she agreed to dig. Next was Elia, tech-savvy kid from down the street who had installed security systems part-time. I asked if he had footage from his driveway camera the night of the greenhouse vandalism. He did. And finally, Angela. She showed up on my porch with tears in her eyes and a Tupperware of baked ziti. "I'm sorry," she said. "They threatened to fine me if I talk to you. But I have minutes from board meetings, real ones. They've been falsifying the published ones. I kept the originals." We sat at my table until midnight, comparing notes, timestamps, and signatures. Story was coming together clear, damning, and massive. This wasn't just harassment. This was fraud, conspiracy, abuse of power. And now, I had the beginnings of a case. Carol thought she could break me, but all she did was give me the reason and the army I needed to bring her down. By mid-September, the heat had started to ease, but the pressure on me hadn't. Carol was doubling down, and the HOA board was now threatening legal eviction through a clause in the revised bylaws claiming I was a clear and present danger to community integrity. But behind the scenes, things were changing fast. I had begun to build something Carol didn't anticipate, a resistance. Quiet but focused, armed not with picket signs or protest, but with receipts, recordings, and revelations. It all started to snap together on a humid Thursday afternoon. Marisol called me, her voice tight with urgency. "I found it," she said. "They're laundering HOA fees through at least 2 shell companies. One is registered in Nevada, the other in Delaware. Both link back to Mesa Horizon Developments, and Carol's name is all over the paperwork. Marisol had uncovered a financial trail that tied the HOA's beautification fund to private development expenses, equipment rentals, surveying bills, and land clearing permits well outside the current HOA jurisdiction. They've been siphoning off money, she said, to prep for Phase 2 development before even disclosing it to the community. We cross-referenced the ledger against minutes Angela had secretly recorded during closed board meetings. They didn't just talk about future expansion. They were actively moving against multiple homeowners who stood in the way. I wasn't the only one being targeted. One name stuck out: Sharon Klein, a 77-year-old widow living on the west boundary. Her water had been interrupted twice, and she'd received threats over a non-compliant retaining wall. Turns out that wall was protecting an easement Carol needed access to. Sharon was terrified. She thought she was losing her memory. But when I showed her our findings, she broke down. "I thought I was going crazy," she whispered. "I thought it was my fault." I assured her it WSN single quotes D. She agreed to testify if it came to it. With Sharon on board and Marisol compiling financial documentation into a forensic-style report, I turned to Eli, the tech-savvy teen. I needed more footage. Eli's setup was better than mine. His family's driveway cam had a wide lens, and he'd kept backups on a personal server. The night my greenhouse was destroyed, we caught the image of a man in dark clothing, carrying a crowbar, getting out of a car registered to Roger Phelps, one of Carol's board members. Clear as day, license plate. Face partially visible. Eli and I made multiple copies of the video. Meanwhile, Lenny, my retired detective friend, dug into Mesa Horizon Developments. His findings shocked even me. Not only was Carol listed as a consultant, but two other HOA board members, Roger and a woman named Denise, had undisclosed financial stakes. Even worse, the land around the reservoir had been quietly rezoned 6 months prior under pressure from a community leadership petition bearing forged homeowner signatures. They were manufacturing consent to increase the buildable density. It was corruption. Plain and simple. And the final piece of the puzzle came from the most unlikely place: a former employee of the law firm representing the HOA, a paralegal named Brent, who contacted me anonymously through an encrypted email address. He'd seen Carol's private memos. They discussed filing an injunction to seize my property via eminent domain, a move Carol believed she could legally justify because the reservoir's infrastructure benefits the broader community. Brent wrote, "They don't realize you own the reservoir outright. She's banking on the public assuming it's community property. You hold the trump card. Use it." That email was like striking oil. I pulled out the deed. Again, reread every clause. Then I contacted my attorney, a seasoned property rights specialist named Janet Park, who'd handled water rights for tribal and rural clients across the state. Janet took one look at the documentation, the history of ownership, the mapped easements, and said, "You have them by the throat, Mr. Holt." She prepared a cease and desist letter that cited specific Arizona water code, infrastructure maintenance liabilities, and civil penalties for unauthorized development on privately held utility assets. But we didn't serve it yet. We were building towards something bigger. That's when I called for a town hall, not an HOA meeting. A real town hall off-site at the local veteran center. We invited every homeowner in Whispering Pines. I sent flyers, personal letters, and digital invites. No HOA involvement. I called it "The Truth About Our HOA, What You're Not Being Told." At first, people were hesitant, but word had spread. Others were fed up with the secret fines, the intimidation, the arbitrary citations. And when Sharon, of all people, stood up and said, "I was nearly driven from my home by lies," others started speaking out. A contractor neighbor said he'd been underpaid for repairs, billed to HOA budgets. A local landscape crew showed invoices, marked up 400% after HOA approval. Then we presented the evidence. Marisol projected her forensic analysis on the screen line by line, tracing how thousands in HOA dues had vanished into untraceable development. Accounts. Angela read aloud the true board meeting minutes, the real ones, where Carol openly mocked residents and described the expansion plan as inevitable once the pests are cleared. Then Eli played the video of Roger smashing my greenhouse. And finally, I stepped up and unfolded the original title deed to the reservoir with the attached contract, survey, and zoning approvals. I stated calmly but firmly, this water source is my legal property. The HOA has no authority to use it, modify it, or represent it in any legal or development filing. If Carol and her board attempt one more move against my home, or anyone else's, I will shut off the water supply, file criminal charges for trespass and vandalism, and trigger civil litigation for fraud and conspiracy. There was dead silence. Then applause. Lenny handed out printed folders with summaries of all evidence. Janet stood by to explain legal options. We created a petition reel this time to call for an emergency vote to dissolve the current HOA board under the bylaws. Misconduct clause. We got the signatures. More than 2/3 of the neighborhood signed. Within 72 hours, Carol's control was crumbling. She tried to call a special session to block the vote, but no one showed up. Her supporters were evaporating. Her power built on lies, fear, and assumption was vanishing like mist under sunlight. And I wasn't just some old man with a grudge anymore. I was the property owner who held the keys to the one thing this community couldn't function without. Water. The story wasn't over yet, but Carol's end had begun. It was the most crowded HOA meeting Whispering Pines had ever seen. People stood shoulder to shoulder in the clubhouse, sweating under buzzing fluorescent lights. Folding chairs were dragged from every storage closet. Late arrivals leaned against the back wall, whispering anxiously. The usual air of smug control, the kind Carol always basked in, was gone. Everyone had heard about the town hall. Everyone had seen the evidence packets. And tonight, everyone was here to watch what happened when truth walked into a room full of liars. Carol entered 5 minutes late, flanked by Roger and Denise like bodyguards. Her coral blazer was perfectly pressed. Her pearls glinted under the lights, but her expression, usually smug and unbothered, was tight, controlled. She knew the storm had arrived. She took the podium, cleared her throat, and forced a smile. "Before we begin," she said, "let me just thank you all for showing up tonight. I know there have been rumors circulating, and I'm here to assure you that your board has nothing to hide." A snort came from somewhere near the back. A few people chuckled. Carol pressed on. "As president of this HOA, it has always been my mission to protect property values, ensure safety, and foster unity. Sadly, recent events have been deliberately twisted by a disgruntled homeowner." I stood up. "Name me." "Carol, you've been naming me behind my back for months." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Carol hesitated. "Mr. Holt, you'll have your turn." "I own the reservoir," I said clearly, holding up the deed. "Every gallon of water that touches this community flows through land I legally own. And you've been abusing that access for years." The silence was thunderous. Carol's lips pressed together. "Mr. Holt is engaging in intimidation and misinformation." I walked to the front and handed Janet Park, my lawyer, a folder. She stepped up beside me, calm and measured. "I represent Mr. Holt," Janet said. "We have in our possession the original title deed to the reservoir, permits, water use rights, and the maintenance contract signed by the original developer. The HOA has no legal authority over the reservoir, nor any right to develop infrastructure on that land without consent. That consent has never been given, Carol tried to interrupt. "This meeting isn't. Let's continue," Janet said, turning the page. "We also have evidence of multiple zoning violations, misuse of HOA funds, and personal enrichment schemes involving Mesa Horizon Developments, a company in which 3 board members, including Ms. Whitmore, hold concealed financial interest." Marisol rose from her seat and handed out financial breakdowns to everyone. Highlighted columns, payment trails, marked up invoices, shell companies. Denise went pale. Roger folded his arms and stared at the floor. "But Carol?" She smirked. "Do you honestly think people are going to believe that I what? Built a real estate empire off HOA funds? Please. This is a smear campaign. You're just bitter because we finally enforced the rules." I looked her in the eyes. "No, Carol. I'm furious because you used the rules as a weapon. You cut off my water, destroyed my greenhouse, tried to bankrupt me. You turned my neighbors against me, and you were ready to ruin anyone who stood in your way just to push your expansion plan." Angela stepped forward. She held a USB stick in the air. "I have the unedited board meeting recordings," she said. "The real ones. I've uploaded them to the cloud. If you want to hear Carol referring to residents as pests or saying she'd steamroll the old guard, it's all there." A screen was rolled out. Eli hooked up the projector. The audio began. Carol's voice filled the room. "Holt's garden makes US look like we're still in the Dan Dust Bowl. Once he's out, the rest will fall into line. The old woman on lot 14 is already cracking. We'll file a lien a week before the holidays, catch her off guard, push the emotional angle." Gasps, whispers, disgust. Sharon stood up, her cane shaking in her hand. "That old woman is me," she said. "You tried to steal my home," Janet continued, presenting legal terms, fraud statutes, conflict of interest. Then Lenny, the ex-detective, stepped forward. He detailed the fake petition signatures, complete with handwriting analysis, proving at least 30 names were forged. And finally, Eli played the security footage. The crowd watched as Roger Phelps stepped out of a sedan, walked to my greenhouse, and smashed the roof with a crowbar. "Can you explain that, Roger?" I asked. He stammered. Carol cut in. "That footage is doctored. It's time-stamped, multiple angles. Witness-backed," Janet said. "And it's admissible in court." Then came the climax. Janet produced the final document, a cease and desist letter, authorized by the court earlier that morning, ordering the HOA to halt all enforcement actions pending investigation into financial misconduct, zoning fraud, and criminal harassment. Carol's mask cracked. She laughed, a high, unhinged noise. "You people are fools. You think this is justice? You think one crusty old engineer and his gardening club are going to stop progress?" She turned on me, finger pointing. "You think you're clever, Holt? You think owning a puddle makes you king?" I didn't flinch. "I'm not the king, I'm the dam." And tonight, the floodgates had opened. 2 plainclothes officers stepped forward. Carol blinked. "What is this?" she demanded. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of public documents, and criminal vandalism," one said calmly. "You have the right to remain silent." As they read her rights, she shouted over them. "This is political. You're going to regret this. My attorney will crush you. I am Whispering Pines." No one moved to help her. Not Roger, not Denise, not a single board member. They stood frozen as she was handcuffed, her pearl bracelet snapping off and skittering across the tile. She was let out into the parking lot. Cameras followed. Phones recorded. A woman who'd ruled by fear was now exposed, silenced by her own words and undone by the very documents she tried to bury. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, some in stunned silence, but for me, it wasn't about spectacle. It was about peace. I stood by the window, looking out across the lawn toward the hill that rose behind my property. The reservoir glimmered in the moonlight, My wife's dream. Our sanctuary. Safe. For now. The days that followed Carol Whitmore's arrest were filled with something I hadn't felt in years. Lightness. The kind of peace that comes not from revenge, but from restoration. From knowing that the truth, long buried beneath bureaucracy and bullying, had finally seen daylight. Her face was plastered all over the local news. HOA president arrested for fraud and conspiracy in Whispering Pines scandal. The story was picked up by 3 regional outlets and even made a brief appearance on a national HOA watchdog podcast. The charges were severe. In total, Carol faced 11 counts: embezzlement, mail fraud, document falsification, unlawful surveillance, conspiracy to commit zoning fraud, and multiple counts of property damage and harassment. Her bail was denied, deemed a flight risk. Roger and Denise were next. With the board in shambles and no legal cover, they both tried to claim ignorance. But with signed contracts, emails, and meeting minutes bearing their names, neither of them stood a chance. Roger caved first, cutting a deal and turning over more internal documents, emails from Carol's private server, plans to fast-track HOA-controlled demolition of problem properties, and invoices from Mesa Horizon Developments for consulting work that were essentially payouts. Denise's shell companies were traced back to several fraudulent tax filings. She was disbarred from sitting on any future HOA, corporate board, or nonprofit in the state. But it wasn't just their downfall that mattered. It was what we built after. We held a new community vote, transparent, open, paper ballots, hand-counted, in full view. For the first time, people felt safe enough to speak. Angela was elected interim president. Lenny took over compliance oversight. Marisol, hesitant at first, was voted in as treasurer. And Sharon, yes Sharon, became our community liaison. The HOA charter was rewritten with the help of pro bono legal experts Janet recruited. We stripped away the arbitrary rules and recentered our governance around one core idea: respect over control. Gone were the nonsense violations about birdbath height, flag colors, or seasonal wreaths. We abolished the fine system entirely unless there was clear legal hazard. All past fines were nullified. All liens lifted. We created a community restoration fund financed partially from restitution payments seized from Carol's frozen assets. It paid to rebuild my greenhouse. It helped Sharon install a new ramp for her porch. It reimbursed Angela for 2 years of unexplained landscaping fees. And it helped us put real safety measures in place: motion detection lights in common areas, upgraded security cameras, and a whistleblower hotline monitored by an external agency. The Reservoir? We signed a long-term use agreement. I retained full ownership, but allowed the HOA access under strict conditions. A maintenance budget would be created, jointly approved by both parties. Any proposed work near the reservoir now required a community-wide vote and third-party review. That reservoir had once been a source of control for Carol. Now it was a symbol of balance. We hosted a community picnic up there the following spring. First one in years. I grilled ribs, Angela brought pie, and even Eli's parents, who had once refused to speak to me, shook my hand and thanked me. Children ran barefoot along the trail. Someone played an old Johnny Cash song on a Bluetooth speaker. Sharon danced with her cane in the grass. For the first time in years, Whispering Pines felt like a community, not a gated fortress of silent resentment. Not a battleground, a neighborhood. And me? I finally slept without checking my cameras every night. I spent my mornings in the greenhouse again, coaxing life from soil with the same patience June once taught me. Sometimes I'd stand by the reservoir and close my eyes, listening to the wind. I felt her there. In the water, in the trees, in the peace we fought to reclaim. This ordeal had changed me. I wasn't just a quiet man who wanted to be left alone. I was part of something now. Not because I sought it, but because I realized How easy it is for silence to become complicity. We always think tyranny wears jackboots. But sometimes it wears pearls and holds a clipboard. It took everything I had to stand up. But what we built afterward made it worth every wound. The HOA is now something we're proud of. Something we guard fiercely, not with rules, but with transparency. We created a new tradition. Every year, on the day of the town hall that exposed it all, we plant a tree near the reservoir. A symbol of growth, resilience, and remembrance. We named the hill overlooking the water, June's Rise. It's where I proposed to her. It's where we spread her ashes. Now, it belongs not just to memory, but to the living. What started as an attack on a pipe, a petty grievance, became the catalyst for an entire neighborhood's rebirth. We didn't just defeat corruption. We replaced it with something better. There's a strange silence that follows a battle. Not emptiness, but clarity. I walk my land every morning now, not out of fear or habit, but out of gratitude. I pause by the gate where Carol once shouted threats through gritted teeth. I pass the spot where my greenhouse once lay shattered, now rebuilt stronger, greener than ever. And then I reach the reservoir. Still, deep, mine. Some people ask me why I didn't just sell and leave when things got hard. Could have, I almost did. But this land wasn't just dirt and piping. It was the last gift from my wife. It was where we dreamed of living free, raising food from the earth, and leaving something better behind. And no HOA president, no matter how cunning, how cruel, how well connected, was going to take that from me. What I learned through all of this is simple. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You need to be steady, precise. You need truth. And most of all, you need people. I thought I was alone. I was wrong. There are more of us out there. People tired of being bullied under the disguise of policy. Tired of watching communities rot behind painted fences and power-tripping bureaucrats. When we come together, when we speak, when we document, change happens. Last I heard, Carol's case is headed for trial. The charges keep piling up. The community she tried to control now thrives in her absence. And I keep tending to the land. I keep listening to the wind. And I keep planting. Because the truth is, justice doesn't grow overnight. It takes water. It takes time. It takes care. But it does grow. So now I turn to you. Yes, you watching this right now. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare? Has someone in power used bureaucracy to intimidate, isolate, or hurt you? Comment below and tell me your story. Your voice matters. Your story matters, because every time we speak out, we shine a light where they hoped we'd stay quiet. And who knows, maybe your struggle, your triumph, will be the next one I get to share. Because even against the greatest odds, standing your ground can change everything.